Hey guys, tonight we ride out into the high desert winds, the kind that sting your eyes and dry your lips as you scan the horizon for outlaws, or maybe just a decent water source. You picture yourself on horseback, the sun baking your back, boots dusty, hat low. You're the classic cowboy, rugged, heroic, definitely photogenic. But hold your horses, literally. That whole image, the one etched into your brain by decades of Western films, it's mostly a myth. The real cowboys of the American West? Well, let's just say you probably wouldn't cast yourself as one after a few days in their boots. You'd smell terrible. Your shirt wouldn't match your pants. And you'd likely be limping from a saddle sore. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tug your hat down against the wind and start riding. The first thing you notice is the other cowboys staring, not because you're new, but because your gear looks clean, coordinated. You're wearing what Hollywood thinks cowboys wore, a spotless Stetson, color-matched bandana, and a suede jacket with fringe so long it could double as a curtain. But out here, nobody's impressed. Most real cowboys didn't look like movie stars. They looked like the bottom of a laundry basket. You wore what you could afford, which often meant scavenged or secondhand. Your shirt might be 2 sizes too big, your pants patched at the knees, and your boots? Hand-me-downs with mismatched heels. Even hats weren't standardized. Sure, some wore wide-brimmed Stetsons, but others had bowlers, pork pies, or whatever they could find. One cowboy might sport a derby that made him look like a misplaced banker. Another might have a crumpled sombrero inherited from a vaquero cousin. And those pristine leather chaps you see in films? In reality, they were dirty, cracked, and smelled like every cow you'd ever ridden behind. Cowboys wore chaps to protect their legs from thorny brush and biting insects, not to look cool while walking into a saloon. They might be goat hide, canvas, or rough leather, and once you sweated into them, they'd take on a life of their own. Fringe? That was decorative nonsense. Real fringe collects dust, burrs, and snagged tumbleweeds. The movies lied to you. And speaking of the movies, how about those perfectly coiffed cowboy beards and clean-shaven jaws? Out here, grooming tools were scarce. You might go weeks without shaving or cutting your hair. Baths? If you crossed a river, congrats, you just had one. Otherwise, your scent was part of your identity. And let's not even talk about your teeth. Even the color palette was off. Westerns loved sepia tones and muted tans. But real cowboys liked bright colors, flannel reds, indigo blues, even loud yellows. Why? Because they were cheap and available. And when everything you owned came from a catalog or general store, you took what you could get. Want a quirky tidbit? Some cowboys wore women's garments, petticoats or long johns, not because they were cross-dressing, but because they were practical and cheap at second-hand shops. You didn't care what it was, so long as it kept you warm at night. And remember those shiny spurs clinking as cowboys strutted down boardwalks? Spurs were tools, not fashion statements, often dull, sometimes missing rowels, and rarely flashy, unless you were showing off at a rodeo, which, by the way, wasn't a daily thing. And here's the funny part. A lot of cowboys hated being called cowboys. The term was sometimes seen as low class or even insulting. Depending on where you worked, you might be a cowhand, cowpuncher, wrangler, drover, or stockman. Cowboy only gained its romantic flair much later when people started writing songs and dime novels about the West. Historians still argue whether the cowboy look we recognize today was ever real at all, or whether it was constructed later, filtered through a camera lens and polished for Broadway. So where did the myth start? Mostly in the late 1800s when Wild West shows like Buffalo Bills turned cowhands into performers. They needed a uniform look, so they invented one. Wide-brimmed hat? Check. Fancy boots? Check. Bandana and vest? Check. Never mind that actual cowboys couldn't afford matching socks, let alone a rhinestone-studded belt buckle. Then came the movies. Early silent films like The Great Train Robbery, 1903, established the cowboy image as clean-cut, morally upright, and always the good guy. But real cowboys weren't moral mascots. They were tired, underpaid workers trying to stay alive and maybe save up for their own plot of land. You roll into camp now and dismount your horse, wincing as your knees creak. Around you, the others are heating beans over a fire, passing a canteen, swatting flies. Nobody's posing. Nobody's flexing their jawline. Just sunburned people in beat-up hats, some with old scars, some with busted fingers, and all wearing the exact same expression, exhausted. You sit on a log, pull off your boots, and immediately regret it. The smell is something between sour milk and regret. You're part of the team now. You wonder how anyone made it through a cattle drive looking like that guy Clint Eastwood played. The truth? They didn't. They were sore, sunburned, bug-bitten, and bone-weary. But they were also proud, weirdly cheerful, and fiercely loyal to one another. You might not look like a cowboy, but if you can hang on for a few weeks without whining, without getting yourself trampled, and without complaining too much about the food, you might just become one. Eventually, you lie back in your bedroll and look up at the stars. You're wearing a shirt 2 sizes too big, a hat that doesn't fit, and boots that belong to someone named Elmer. You are filthy, sore, and smell worse than your horse. But for the first time, you realize this isn't the cowboy image Hollywood sold you. It's better. It's real. You wake up to a boot in your ribs, not a kick, more of a polite prod from the cook who's trying to rouse everyone without starting a fist fight. The sun's just barely showing its teeth over the horizon, and the fire is already smoking. Someone hands you a tin cup of coffee so strong it might count as a controlled substance. You drink it anyway. The other cowhands are stirring. They stretch, groan, complain, and immediately start working. No one draws a pistol. No one flips a poker table. And most shockingly, no one challenges anyone to a duel. Because despite what every Western you've ever seen might claim, gunfights were not a part of your daily cowboy experience. You weren't slinging bullets at high noon. You were slinging hay bales, or if you were unlucky, shoveling things that used to be inside a cow. Hollywood loves a showdown. 2 men, 1 street, wind whispering through empty alleys, spurs jangling, fingers twitching near their holsters. But in real life, gunfights were rare, deadly rare. And when they did happen, they weren't anything like the choreographed, dramatic duels you see on screen. In reality, guns were tools, not accessories. You might carry a revolver, but not for style. For snakes, predators, or rustlers. Most cowboys preferred rifles anyway. A long gun could hit a coyote at 50 yards. A revolver? You'd be lucky to hit the outhouse. And while Hollywood shows cowboys as expert marksmen, the truth? Most were terrible shots. Ammunition was expensive, and practice wasn't exactly encouraged. You didn't waste bullets unless you had to. You learned to use your rope, your dog, or your voice before you reached for your weapon. Historians still argue whether some towns actually enforced strict gun check policies, requiring visitors to hand over their firearms upon arrival, but there's decent evidence that many did. Dodge City, Tombstone, Deadwood, they all had local laws that made carrying a sidearm in town illegal. You want to start something? Better bring your fists or a really persuasive argument. Here's the twist. When violence did erupt, it was often sudden, messy, and usually fueled by alcohol. Bar fights could escalate, but not into slow-motion duels. It was more like a punch, a shove, a shout, and bang. One shot, maybe two, and usually from behind. Cowboys weren't honor-bound warriors. They were tired laborers with bad tempers and worse whiskey, and most of them hated trouble. Getting arrested meant time off the trail, unpaid. You'd be fined, jailed, or fired, not exactly worth your dignity. And don't forget, most cowboy jobs were seasonal. One good cattle drive might mean enough pay to last through winter. Blow it on a bar fight, and you'd spend December eating beans in a ditch. Besides, guns were heavy, bulky, hot in the sun, cold at night, and prone to jamming. Most cowboys would rather carry an extra pair of socks than a fancy six-shooter. One mainstream fact often gets overlooked. Many of the most iconic gunfighters weren't cowboys at all. Wyatt Earp, Lawman, Wild Bill Hickok, Gambler, and Scout. Billy the Kid, Rustler, and Outlaw. The cowboy image got blended with all kinds of Wild West figures until it became one big, dusty stereotype. And let's not forget, being known as a gunslinger usually got you killed. Fast. The fastest draw in the West had a lifespan shorter than a mayfly with asthma. Reputation brought challengers, and challengers brought bullets. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cowboys actually danced when bullets flew, literally. Shooting at the feet was a cruel form of barroom entertainment where some drunken fool would make another man dance by firing at the ground near his boots. It wasn't funny. It was dangerous and sometimes fatal. Not exactly what you see in the movies. Now picture this. You're walking through a dusty town looking for supplies. A couple of ranch hands are already ahead of you, joking, spitting sunflower seeds, not a care in the world. You see a saloon, but they walk right past it. Why? Because they know better. Saloons were dangerous, not just because of fights, but because of disease, scams, bad liquor, and unpredictable patrons. You were more likely to lose your paycheck than your life in one, but the odds weren't great either way. Back on the trail, the only time you'd think of drawing a gun is if something startled the herd, or if a rattler slithered too close to your bedroll. And even then, you'd hesitate. A stampede caused by a gunshot could ruin your month or your bones. Remember this for later. You weren't just protecting yourself from trouble. You were protecting the herd. One runaway steer could lead 50 others off a cliff. Silence was survival. Of course, some cowboys did keep weapons for protection. A .44 revolver tucked under the saddle, or a sawed-off shotgun by the chuck wagon. But again, these were tools. Just like a branding iron, a lariat, or a coffee pot that doubled as a percussion grenade when kicked in the dark. You settle into your evening shift now, walking the perimeter while others sleep, The stars overhead are impossibly clear. You've got your rifle slung across your back, mostly for show. If anything happens, you'll yell before you shoot. You think about what it would actually be like to fight someone out here, to shoot someone, to bury them. No lawman, no paperwork, just the wind, the grave, and the long ride back to explain what happened. It isn't thrilling. It's terrifying. And that's the truth Hollywood often skips. Most cowboys were scared of violence. They had no safety nets, no backup, and no reshoots if things went south. You didn't square up and say something cool. You ducked, you ran. You tried to live another day to collect your pay and maybe, just maybe, buy your mama a new pair of shoes next time you pass through town. So, you keep walking. No duels tonight. No dramatic music. Just you, the cattle, and that cold tin starry silence. The morning smells like something died in the coffee. Probably just yesterday's grounds boiled again, but you drink it anyway, because out here, sleep is currency and caffeine is gold. You rub your eyes, stretch your aching back, and squint toward the rising sun. You expect the others to be bustling toward the saloon for breakfast, maybe a poker game, a piano tune, a loose conversation about bounties or bank jobs. But nope, they're gathered around a dented cookpot and a flap of canvas stretched between two wagons. That's your dining hall, a muddy tent, a few crates, some fried salt pork, and maybe, if the trail boss is feeling generous, a can of peaches split 7 ways. Because, despite what Western films love to show, saloons weren't the central hub of cowboy life. That honor went to the chuck wagon. Forget pianos, brass railings, and showgirls in red corsets. The average cowboy's social life revolved around food, bad food, and the cook who made it. Known as the cookie, this unsung hero was equal parts chef, medic, referee, and therapist. If you ticked off the cook, you were toast. Literally. Movie saloons are glamorous. Wooden swing doors, whiskey sloshing in clean glasses, bartenders with handlebar mustaches, and everyone looking freshly bathed. But in reality, saloons were more like dark, smoke-choked sheds with warped floorboards and bartenders who rinsed glasses in the same bucket used for mopping floors. And most cowboys didn't have the time or money to hang out there anyway. If you were on a cattle drive, your world moved. You had to stay with the herd, which meant your bar, your bunk, and your buddies traveled with you. No fixed addresses, no bar tabs, just saddle sores and singed bacon. When you did reach a town, your priorities weren't whiskey and women. They were laundry, sleep, and mail from home. If you had enough spare change, maybe a shave or a bath, maybe. Otherwise, you stayed out of town as much as you could. Historians still argue whether cowboys avoided towns out of preference or practicality. But the evidence leans toward both. Towns had rules. Bosses had rules. And saloons? Saloons had trouble. Let's break that down. Sure, saloons existed, and yes, they were popular. But for whom? Miners, drifters, gamblers, and railroad workers were far more frequent patrons than cowboys, who were often just passing through. You didn't strut into a bar, order a shot, and start flirting with someone named Ruby. You maybe had one drink, if you could afford it, and left before things got rowdy. And drinks? Forget those crystal-clear pours in cut-glass tumblers. Whiskey was usually raw, unaged, and possibly poisoned with turpentine or tobacco juice. Beer wasn't refrigerated. Wine wasn't a thing. If you were lucky, you got watered-down rot gut. If you were unlucky, you got blindness. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many saloons had a sign that read, "No spitting on the stove." Why? Because men would gather around the potbelly stove in the center and aim their chewing tobacco spit at it. Nothing screams Western ambiance like the smell of burning spit. And the gambling? Mostly rigged. Card sharks, loaded dice, sleight of hand dealers. If you didn't know the tricks, you left broke or bleeding. Some cowboys gambled, sure, but many were warned against it. Your wages were hard-earned, and your trail boss might dock your pay if you got into trouble. So, where did cowboys relax? Right here, around the fire, boots off, beans bubbling. Maybe someone picks up a harmonica. Maybe someone tells a dirty joke about a cow and a fence post. Maybe Cookie throws a horseshoe at you for asking if dinner is almost ready. This is where bonds formed. This is where stories were told. You learned who had a scar from a mountain lion, who once kissed a school teacher in Abilene, who could ride backwards at full gallop while eating a biscuit. You think about that as you spoon up something vaguely gray and salty. It's not good, but it's warm, and it's real. And in this moment, with the fire popping and your breath curling in the cool dawn, you're content. You remember a movie scene where the cowboy walks into a saloon, everyone goes quiet, and he orders milk just to be different. In real life, milk would be spoiled, and you'd be laughed out of the building, or worse, beat up by the mule skinner with a twitchy eye. And about those piano players you see in every bar scene, they were rare. Instruments were expensive, and so was space. Some larger towns might have a music hall or theater, but most frontier settlements were lucky to have chairs that didn't break. Still, music existed, just not where you think. Cowboys often sang to their cattle at night to soothe them. These weren't Broadway tunes. They were long, slow ballads passed down through oral tradition. Sad, melodic, and repetitive. You hum to the cows not because you're an entertainer, but because stampedes happen when cattle get spooked. And silence spooks them. One mainstream fact that movies often get wrong: cowboys weren't just rowdy brawlers. They were extremely superstitious. Whistling at night was thought to summon trouble. Leaving your hat on the bed was bad luck. And borrowing someone's saddle without asking, that could start a blood feud. So, while the saloon might look like a cowboy's playground on screen, in reality, it was often a place of risk and temptation. A temporary stop, not a home. The real comfort came from your crew, your camp, and your rhythm on the trail. Now the sun is high. It's time to move again. You climb into the saddle with a grunt. Behind you, Cookie bangs the lid on the stew pot, a signal that breakfast is done. And so are his good manners. As you ride, you pass a dusty settlement, one street, a few storefronts, maybe a single church. You think about stopping, about walking through those swinging doors and ordering a drink like the cowboys do in the movies. But then you remember the smell of burning spit, the watered-down whiskey, the angry gamblers, the silent stares, and you decide maybe tonight you'd rather sit by the fire and listen to Jose sing about a lost horse named Loco. Good choice, cowboy. You ride in silence for a while, the leather creaking beneath you, your legs numb from the saddle. Dust coats your teeth. Your shirt sticks to your back. The sun has no mercy today. It presses down like a branding iron. The herd moves slow, heads low, tails swishing at flies. You're daydreaming again. Maybe picturing that wide-open freedom the movies promised. Endless prairies, boundless choice, just you and your horse against the world. And then your trail boss yells at you for the third time to watch the left flank. You snap back to reality. Because despite the myth of the wandering cowboy, the truth is you didn't roam free forever. You were on a schedule, a strict one. The cattle had to reach the railhead by a certain date or your paycheck got cut, and someone probably got fired. You had a job, a route, and a boss who cared less about your dreams of independence and more about how many steers you lost crossing the Red River. Hollywood makes it look like cowboys drifted from one town to the next with no responsibilities. Just troublemakers with a heart of gold and enough bullets to rewrite justice. But real cowboys? They were more like long-haul truckers with hats and worse hygiene. You had a crew, a code, and a map. Well, not a printed map, but a route passed down by more experienced cowhands, marked by water sources, grazing spots, and danger zones. You didn't just ride west. You followed trails with names, the Chisholm, the Goodnight Loving, the Western Trail. And these drives weren't some breezy adventure through postcard-worthy valleys. They were brutal. You rose before dawn, ate cold biscuits, mounted up, and didn't dismount again until sundown. You'd ride through rain, mud, lightning, hail, sometimes snow. If the river flooded too bad, you crossed it anyway. And freedom, that was relative. You might spend 16 hours a day in the saddle taking orders from a trail boss who hadn't smiled since Appomattox. You weren't your own man. You were one small cog in a dusty, mooing machine. Historians still argue whether cattle drives were more economically vital or culturally mythologized. But one thing is clear. They were grueling, dangerous, and about as free as a factory job, except with snakes and less soap. Let's talk about the logistics for a moment. You're part of a team, maybe 10 to 15 men to move 2,000 to 3,000 head of cattle. That's a lot of horns. Each cowboy had a role. The point man led the herd, the swing riders kept it moving from the sides, the flank riders prevented sideways escapes, and the drag riders, poor souls, rode in the rear and inhaled cow dust all day. You rotated shifts, took night watch, and slept in 2-hour snatches while praying a stampede wouldn't trample your face before dawn. Every man pulled his weight, because if someone slacked, the herd scattered, and that meant lost time, lost money. And don't get romantic about the nights either. Sure, the stars were beautiful, but you were sleeping on the ground wrapped in a blanket crusted with yesterday's sweat, using your saddle as a pillow. One eye open for snakes, one ear open for rustlers. Speaking of rustlers, yeah, they existed, and they were a serious threat. A gang could sneak a dozen steers from your herd in the dark and vanish before breakfast. You didn't hide out in pursuit like some Hollywood hero. You reported it, maybe reinforced your watch rotations, and tried to hold your temper. A quirky little detail. Some cowboys swore by tying bells to the lead steers. If the ringing stopped in the night, something was wrong. Or, alternatively, the bell had fallen off and landed in a pile of manure. Now imagine this. You're on day 40 of the drive. You've been through 5 storms, 3 rivers, 1 angry skunk, and a sudden bout of food poisoning that spread through camp like gossip in a sewing circle. Your horse is limping, your boots are cracked, and you've eaten so much salted meat you can smell it coming out of your pores. This isn't freedom. It's endurance. It's commitment. It's not the Wild West of movies. It's a hard, muddy grind that leaves you wondering, if maybe, just maybe, you should have become a blacksmith instead. And yet, there's something to it. When the herd moves in unison, when the air cools at dusk, when the coyotes sing in the distance and the coffee tastes slightly less like axle grease, something stirs, a feeling of purpose, a sense that, yes, you're part of something real. Hollywood skips the boredom, the repetition, the bone-deep exhaustion. It skips the sore thighs, the awkward silence after an argument, the horror of riding through a swarm of prairie mosquitoes so thick they look like smoke. You're not a lone ranger. You're an overworked employee with a lariat. And while we're myth-busting, very few cowboys actually owned their own horses. Most worked for a rancher who provided the animals and expected them back in decent shape. You couldn't ride your mount into the ground just because it made a good story. That horse cost more than your entire wardrobe. You weren't galloping dramatically across hills every day either. You were walking, trotting, circling the herd slowly, watching for stragglers, keeping pace with animals that weren't in any hurry to get anywhere. Sometimes, just to break the monotony, you might race another rider to the next waterhole, or bet on who could rope a runaway calf the fastest, or, once in a while, prank the new guy by putting a cactus in his bedroll. You'll get yours later. Now let's talk about the big finish, the part the movies always jump to. You finally reach the railhead. Maybe Abilene, maybe Dodge, maybe Ogallala. You count the cattle. Pay gets divided. Some riders quit, some sign up for the next drive, and some vanish into town like dust in the wind. You're sore, tired, but there's a glint of pride there. You did it. You crossed hundreds of miles, avoided floods, fought off boredom, and didn't lose too many cows. Your boots are ruined, your shirt is a color not found in nature, and your hat smells like soup. But you made it. You won't stay long. A week, maybe. Long enough to wash your clothes, pat your saddle, and wonder why saloon whiskey still tastes like sadness. Then you're back on the trail, because freedom isn't found in roaming. It's found in finishing what you started. The wind picks up again as you leave town, a hard gust that pushes your hat sideways and fills your ears with the sound of emptiness. The herd is behind you now. Your legs ache less, but your back still hasn't forgiven you. And as you ride beside a fellow cowhand, you glance over, half listening to him hum a lullaby in Spanish. You realize something. He's not who you expected to be riding with. Because one of the biggest things Westerns got wrong is this. Most cowboys were not white. It's a quiet truth buried under decades of Hollywood casting. But when you dig into the dust and bones of the real West, the truth rises, sun-scorched and undeniable. Historians estimate that 1 in 4 cowboys was black. A huge portion were Mexican, Tejano, or indigenous. The West wasn't a whitewashed land of rugged Anglo gunmen. It was wildly multicultural, deeply layered, and built on the backs of people whose stories were often erased from the screen. You glance around the trail crew now. There's Isaiah, who grew up on a Louisiana plantation and started wrangling cattle at 13. He jokes better than anyone and rides like he was born in the saddle. There's Mateo, whose grandfather was a vaquero before Texas was even Texas. And there's Elijah, a quiet Creek man who doesn't talk much, but somehow always knows when a storm is coming. You? You're the one trying to remember if you packed extra socks. The American cowboy didn't come from thin air. He evolved from centuries of Mexican ranching culture. The word rodeo? Spanish. So is lariat, Chaps, chaparreras, Mustang, and even Buckaroo, a bastardization of vaquero. Hollywood might have dressed him in American flags and given him a southern drawl, but the cowboy's DNA traces deep into Latin American roots. The first real cowhands were Mexican horsemen skilled in livestock management, long before the cattle trail stretched across U.S. territory. When Texas joined the Union and Anglo settlers moved west, they didn't reinvent ranching. They copied the system already in place. Mexican cowhands trained many early American riders, but somewhere along the way, Hollywood rewrote the guest list. And then there were the black cowboys, often forgotten entirely by the movies. After the Civil War, many formerly enslaved men in the South turned to ranch work. It was one of the few jobs where their skill was valued more than their skin color. They became riders, wranglers, cooks, and trail bosses. Some, like Nat Love, became legends in their own right. Nat, known as Deadwood Dick, told tales of bronco-busting sharpshooting and cattle drives that rivaled any pulp novel. Some historians argue whether Nat Love exaggerated parts of his story. Probably. But even so, the fact remains. Black cowboys were everywhere. They broke horses, worked harder than most, and sometimes led entire drives. But Hollywood, well, when was the last time you saw a black cowboy headline a Western before the 1970s? Even then it was rare, and often played for novelty. That silence? That's decades of erasure. Now let's ride a little further west, into indigenous territories. The West wasn't empty land waiting for settlers. It was home. Home to tribes with rich traditions of horsemanship, animal tracking, and land stewardship. And many indigenous people became cowboys too, either by choice or necessity. Some worked on reservations. Others took jobs on white-owned ranches. Still others passed as Mexican or mixed heritage to escape persecution and find employment. Their knowledge of land, weather, and wildlife often made them indispensable, though rarely acknowledged. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some tribal nations had their own rodeos, with their own styles of riding and competition, long before the Wild West became a traveling circus. Even today, indigenous rodeo is alive and well, and often more authentic than anything Hollywood ever produced. So why did the movies get it so wrong? Simple? Marketing? In the early days of cinema, films had to sell, and studios believed their audiences wanted one thing: white male heroes. So that's what they served over and over. Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, Gary Cooper, all grit, no melanin. They made cowboys into saints, stoic, silent, shooting bad guys at high noon. And because of that, entire communities were erased from their own history. Historians still argue whether this was conscious propaganda or just lazy storytelling. Either way, it stuck. And now, here you are, riding the real trail, shoulder to shoulder with people from every background, no fanfare, no spotlight, just hard work and mutual respect, because out here, your worth isn't in your skin, but in your saddle. The sun climbs higher. Isaiah tells a joke so filthy, it makes Cookie blush. Mateo rolls a cigarette with one hand while tying down a pack mule with the other. Elijah whistles a tune that sounds older than the hills. These are your people. You take off your hat to wipe your brow, then glance up at the ridge ahead. There's movement, a rider silhouetted, watching, then gone. You feel that prickle of tension, not from race, but from danger. Could be rustlers, could be scouts, Could be someone just looking for a cow to borrow permanently. Whatever it is, you'll face it together. Because out here, no one rides alone. You remember a movie where the hero walks into town, the only person with a horse, a clean shirt, and a moral compass. He doesn't need help. He doesn't trust anyone. And he never ever rides with a black or Mexican or indigenous companion. Unless they're comic relief or a plot device, you shake your head. That's not the West, you know. Your West is complicated, messy, sometimes cruel, but it's real. It's filled with songs in Spanish, prayers in Cherokee, lullabies passed down from enslaved mothers, and laughter that bubbles up despite the heat, the stink, and the saddle sores. This trail isn't about one man. It's about many. And every hoofbeat you hear, that's the sound of history, ridden by hands of every color. You're beginning to bond with your horse. Or, more accurately, you're beginning to accept that your horse is going to do whatever it wants, and you're just here for the ride. You've named it Twitchy, not because it's nervous, though it is, but because its left ear never stops moving. It's like it's constantly listening for a better rider. Movies would have you believe you and your horse would be soulmates by now. Trusted companions, communicating with subtle gestures and shared glances. But in truth, horses were tools, not soulmates. Useful, sometimes lovable, often frustrating, rarely elegant. The bond between cowboy and horse wasn't forged in sentimental monologues or dramatic rescues. It was built through necessity, repetition, and a grudging respect earned after days of blisters and bites, yours and the horse's. Your mount likely isn't yours at all. Most cowboys didn't own their horses. Ranchers or trail bosses provided them, often rotating them between riders to avoid wear. If you were lucky, you got one that responded to commands. If you were really lucky, it didn't try to roll over while you were still in the saddle. Hollywood loves the sleek, noble steed. Gleaming coats, braided manes, dramatic rears on their hind legs as bullets fly. Real trail horses, not so much. They were tough, work-worn, and often a little ugly. You didn't ride them into battle. You begged them not to throw you off during a stream crossing. Most had scars, quirks, and at least one mysterious injury that never fully healed. Their names weren't Silver or Thunderbolt. They were Shorty, Buck, that one that kicked Jake, or, in your case, Twitchy. One cowboy once named his horse Maybe because when asked if he'd survived the trail, he'd shrug and say, maybe. And let's talk about care. In the movies, cowboys lovingly brush their horses each night, murmur secrets into their manes, and sleep beside them under the stars. You? You're scrubbing mud off your boots while the horse grazes, unties itself, and tries to chew someone else's bedroll. You'll brush it in the morning, if time allows. You'll check its hooves when it limps. And yes, you'll notice when it stops eating, or starts favoring one leg, or gives you that look that says, if you make me cross one more creek, I swear I will throw you into the sky. Historians still debate whether cowboys formed strong emotional bonds with their horses or treated them like equipment, but most agree it was somewhere in the middle. You respected your horse, you depended on it, but you didn't write poetry about it. A horse was essential to your work. Without it, you were useless. It moved the herd, carried your gear, got you to water before you dried into jerky. But that didn't mean you were composing love letters to it under the moon. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cowboys carried sugar cubes or bits of apple for their horses, not out of affection, but bribery. A cranky horse might respond better if you sweetened the deal. Others swore by whispered threats, low singing, or just pure willpower. One guy swore his horse listened better if he told it embarrassing stories from his childhood. That horse probably died from secondhand shame. And yes, horses got injured a lot. Stepping into gopher holes, slipping on river rocks, getting spooked by snakes, thunder, or suspicious-looking bushes. When that happened, you didn't call a vet, you improvised. A tight wrap, a day off, maybe a poultice if you had the herbs, or, in worse cases, you walked. Walking was a cowboy's nightmare. You weren't trained for it. Your boots weren't made for it. You'd rather fight a cactus than hike 20 miles beside a stubborn cow with hooves like anvils. The movies also like to show cowboys performing miraculous stunts on horseback, leaping from roof to saddle, outrunning trains, riding at full gallop while reloading 2 pistols. You try trotting and drinking water at the same time. The reality is this. Most cowboys rode at a slow walk. Trotting was hard on the body. Galloping was for emergencies. You might gallop for 5 minutes in a month and regret it for the rest of the week. You also didn't ride the same horse all day. You rotated between a remuda, a small herd of spare horses brought along by a designated wrangler. You'd switch mounts every few hours to prevent injury or fatigue. Your favorite horse might be the one that didn't buck when you coughed. Now imagine this scene, the sun setting. You're brushing Twitchy while muttering complaints under your breath. He steps on your foot again. You're bleeding slightly again. And still, there's something in his eye that suggests maybe he doesn't completely hate you. Maybe. That's the cowboy-horse bond. Hard-earned, never assumed, rarely cinematic. You sling your saddle over a fence post, rub your aching thighs, and think back to those movie scenes where the cowboy whispers, "You've always been there for me, boy," to a glistening stallion that looks like it just came from a spa day. You laugh. Twitchy farts loudly in response. Connection achieved. And let's not forget the practicality of gear. Saddles were basic, designed for hours of riding, not dramatic dismounts. Saddlebags carried essentials like jerky, tobacco, matches, maybe a small mirror or a sewing kit. Not ammo belts and mysterious family heirlooms. Your horse didn't come equipped with cinematic timing or a dramatic entrance. It came with burrs in its tail and a habit of stopping to pee at the worst possible moment. But still, it knew the trail. It could smell water before you could. It could hear trouble long before your ears picked it up. And if it didn't throw you by lunchtime, that was a good day. You and your horse might never be best friends, but you were partners. Partners with a mutual agreement. I won't push you too hard if you don't toss me into a cactus. Fair deal. You check Twitchy's hooves one last time, brush the burrs from his flank, and lean against him as the stars begin to prick the sky. He shifts slightly, as if to say, "You're in my space." You smile. "I know, Twitchy. Me too." The trail curves westward, following a dry creek bed lined with brittle grass and bleached bones. You squint at the horizon, searching for something, anything besides dust and sky. Nothing yet. Just the same low hills and long shadows. You shift in your saddle and try to imagine what this land looked like before cowboys came stomping through. Not just before you, but before the barbed wire, before the cattle, before the trails were carved so deep into the soil they might as well be scars. Because, despite what Westerns tell you, Cowboys didn't tame a wild land. They transformed it, sometimes for better, often not. The movies love to frame the West as an untamed, lawless frontier begging to be conquered. Just add one brave white man on a horse, a plucky love interest, and a dusty villain with a mustache, and voila, civilization. But the real story, it's messier, more complicated, and it usually starts with land that didn't belong to you. This ground beneath your boots, it's stolen, claimed through treaties, then broken, bought and sold like a commodity, though it once held meaning far deeper than fences and grazing rights. Cowboys didn't invent the West. They arrived late to the story, after the displacement, after the wars, after the gold rushes carved up rivers and mountains like turkey legs at Thanksgiving. You're standing on what used to be indigenous land, Mexican territory or wild prairie, now fenced off and marked private. You might not feel guilty about it because maybe you didn't do the taking. But it's important to remember, the cowboy was a symptom of change, not a neutral figure. You came after the fire and helped sweep the ashes, and you left your own marks too. Take barbed wire, that stuff changed everything. Before it, ranches had open ranges. Cattle grazed freely, crossing invisible boundaries, wandering for miles. But once wire went up, the West was sliced into parcels. Grazing became regulated. Water was owned, movement restricted. Historians still debate whether barbed wire civilized the West or destroyed it. But there's no denying its power. It ended the open range cowboy era. It sparked range wars. Yes, actual wars with bullets, fires, and fences torn down under cover of night. Some cowboys, including you on more than one occasion, got caught in the middle. Rancher A says, "Don't let the herd graze past that canyon." Rancher B claims the canyon is his. And you? You just want to know who's paying you this week. Now let's talk about water. In the movies, the cowboy's always swigging from a canteen or dunking his head in a perfect mountain stream. In reality, you ration water like gold. You might ride half a day between safe sources, sometimes longer. You check maps, animal signs, even old bones. If the cattle go too long without drinking, they die, and so do you. Water rights were, and still are, a major source of conflict. Wells get poisoned. Rivers get redirected. One landowner dams a stream, and the next one downstream finds his entire pasture drying up. This isn't just inconvenience. It's life or death. You once came across a spring so jealously guarded, the rancher who owned it had strung tripwires around the whole area, just in case. You didn't drink from that one. And yet, it's not all grim. Sometimes the land gives back. You crest a hill and suddenly there's a sea of yellow wildflowers. The herd quiets. The only sound is wind hissing through grass. Or you ride into a cottonwood grove and the air turns cool, damp, filled with the smell of sap and shadow. You feel small, but not in a bad way. Like the land is reminding you it was here first, and it'll be here long after you and your boots are dust. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cowboys believed the land could talk to you if you were quiet enough. Not in words, just in signs. A change in bird calls might mean a storm. Ants moving uphill meant flooding. An odd echo in a canyon might signal a rockfall. Science today backs some of this up. The rest? Just trail wisdom, passed along with a wink. Back to reality. You're looking for grass, not just any grass. Grazable grass with enough coverage for a few hundred hungry mouths. But you're not the only one looking. Coyotes, pronghorns, locusts, compete in herds. And that's before you even run into landowners with rifles and signs that say, trespassers will be shot. Survivors will be shot again. The land is generous, but territorial. And even when it's empty, it's not empty. Take that pile of rocks you passed 2 miles back. You might think it's nothing, but it could have been a trail marker for indigenous migration routes, or a burial cairn, or a sacred place worn smooth by centuries of bare feet and prayer songs. Movies flatten this out. They make the West into a blank canvas waiting to be painted with grit and gunpowder. But the truth is, it was already painted. Layer after layer, culture after culture, story after story. Cowboys didn't create the West. They just happened to show up at the climax. And what about the animals? You've seen buffalo skulls, longhorn skeletons, herds of antelope racing like shadows across a hill. Hollywood sometimes gets that part right, the scale of it all. But they leave out the quieter moments. The owl perched on your saddle horn one night. The fox that followed the herd for days, hoping for scraps. The way prairie dogs scatter like spilled marbles when you ride through their village. It's not just cattle country. It's everything country. And everything fights for space. You remember a movie where the cowboy yells, "Yeah!" and the herd runs in the perfect direction, down a slope, through a canyon, into a sunset. You remember your first stampede? Pure chaos. Cattle bawling, dirt flying, one steer tumbling sideways like a tossed barrel. You couldn't hear your own thoughts, let alone shout a command. You rode and prayed, and when it ended, you counted the bodies and buried the ones you couldn't save. The land doesn't play by your rules, it shrugs at your plans. Your trail boss may have a schedule, but the weather doesn't care. Nor does the river that suddenly rises 3 feet overnight. Nor the lightning that kills 3 cows in a single strike. Nor the mud that swallows a wagon whole. You live with the land, not on top of it. And despite the damage your herd may do, trampled grass, ruined riverbanks, erosion, sometimes the land still forgives you. It gives you shelter in a gulch when a storm rolls in. It gives you silence when the herd is finally fed and bedded. It gives you that fleeting, fragile feeling that you're part of something big. Not the hero, not the villain, just another animal trying to find a place to lie down. You kick a pebble with your boot, it skitters, then vanishes in the dust. You ride on. Another day, another mouthful of dust. You cough once, wipe your face with the same bandana you used to clean your rifle, and chew on a piece of jerky that could double as roofing tile. Twitchy groans beneath you as if to say, "Really? Jerky again?" Still, you're better off than Cookie. He's boiling coffee so thick it might dissolve your cup, while cursing about a missing skillet and someone stealing the last of the dried onions. No one confesses. No one ever confesses. But the question hangs in your mind, as it has on many a sleepless night. What exactly did cowboys eat? Because, contrary to what movies tell you, you weren't biting into steaks every night or feasting in saloons under hanging lanterns and fresh bread. You weren't sliding into a booth at the Western diner for eggs and bacon and a glass of milk, served by a smiling waitress named Millie. Your real menu? Beans, salt pork, more beans, coffee, maybe hardtack. And if you were lucky, maybe a few stolen eggs or a slice of bread gone stiff from heat and age. And then, surprise, more beans. The chuck wagon wasn't just a food truck with personality. It was your kitchen, pharmacy, pantry, water cooler, and occasional church. Cookie ran it like a tight ship, and you didn't dare mess with his setup. You want to die mysteriously in your sleep? Insult the biscuits. Each morning, you had two choices: hot coffee and a biscuit, or no coffee and an argument. And since arguing before dawn was a great way to end up scooping cow pies with a shovel the rest of the week, you usually took the biscuit. Now, let's get this out of the way. Cowboy cooking was more about survival than satisfaction. Your meals weren't made with love, they were made with what you had, and what you had wasn't much. Fresh vegetables? Ha! Those lasted maybe the first week of a cattle drive. After that, you might dream about them like other men dream about sweethearts or a warm bath. Canned peaches? A luxury? You might get them on Sundays if the trail boss was feeling sentimental or guilty. If someone had a birthday or if you'd been rained on for 3 days straight, Cookie might crack open a can and hand out sticky slices with the reverence of a priest offering communion. Beans, though, beans were eternal. They came dried in sacks, easy to store, simple to cook, and nearly impossible to mess up. You soaked them overnight, boiled them in a pot hung over the fire, tossed in salt pork if you had it, and maybe some wild onions or dried chilies if you'd found any on the trail. Salt pork was your main meat. Don't think of bacon. Think of a cube of meat so dense and salty it could probably power a steam engine. It came in barrels, packed in brine, and tasted like regret. Historians still argue whether cowboys had more variety than we give them credit for, but most agree that during long cattle drives, meals became repetitive to the point of madness. Some men started naming their beans. Others added rocks to the stew just to shake things up. And the coffee. Oh, the coffee. You didn't make coffee. You conjured it like a dark ritual. Grounds went straight into the pot. No filters, no measurements. You boiled it over open flame until it smelled like something between engine grease and salvation. Then you poured it through your teeth and pretended not to notice the grit. Some cowboys swore by adding eggshells to settle the grounds. Others added whiskey, molasses, or, once in Cookie's case, a rattlesnake tail, because he heard it gave you courage. It did not. It gave you gas and vivid hallucinations. Here's a quirky tidbit. Cowboys used to call coffee six-shooter soup, and some believed a good cup could fix anything. Headaches, hangovers, heartbreak. When Cookie shouted, "Coffee's hot," men would scramble like gold had been found in the fire pit. Hardtack also made the rounds, a dry, cracker-like bread made of flour and water, sometimes salt if you were lucky. You'd break it against a rock or soak it in coffee until it became chewable. Some pieces were so old and tough they had names, backstories, and legal standing in at least 2 counties. On rare occasions, you might hunt or trap something. A rabbit, a prairie chicken, maybe a rattlesnake if you were feeling brave and low on judgment. Once, someone shot a turkey and became a legend for 3 days. Then he accidentally dropped the cooked bird in the creek. The camp mourned, and sweets? Forget about it. Sugar was rare and rationed. Maybe a molasses candy tucked in your saddlebag. Maybe a stale peppermint left over from someone's holiday care package. If Cookie ever handed out dessert, men wept openly and offered to name their children after him. But it wasn't just what you ate. It was how you ate it. The chuck wagon opened twice a day. You lined up with your tin plate, scooped your meal, and found a rock, stump, or patch of ground to sit on. You ate fast. You didn't complain. You wiped your plate clean with a crust of biscuit or a finger. Then you washed it in the same bucket everyone else used and hoped no one had dysentery. Dining was social. Quiet jokes, loud arguments, stories from the last town or the last fight. Someone might pick at a harmonica. Someone else might chew too loud. You'd grumble, but you'd miss it when you were alone. And speaking of harmonicas, there were rules. No playing during meals. No chewing tobacco near the coffee pot. And for the love of everything sacred, do not bother Cookie unless you're bleeding. But don't get the wrong idea. Even in this grim little culinary world, there were bright spots. When the weather was kind and the cattle calm, Cookie might bake bread in a Dutch oven buried in coals, or simmer a stew with dried herbs, or make flapjacks on a flat rock, flipping them with a knife like he was performing a sacred rite. Those were the nights you remembered, the smell of something almost fresh, the laughter around the fire, the tiny, perfect moments where you could pretend, just for a second, that this wasn't hard living, that it was just living. You remember a scene from a Western where the hero sits alone at a restaurant table, eating a 3-course meal in silence. Probably steak, probably red wine, definitely a clean napkin. You look down at your tin plate. It's beans, again, and the wind has blown dust into your coffee, again. But Isaiah is telling that dumb joke about the banker and the chicken. Mateo is singing to the stew like it's an old lover. Elijah just handed you a crust of bread he saved from lunch. And suddenly, you're not so hungry for steak anymore. You're full enough. The air shifts. You feel it before you hear it. Low rumble. Sudden stillness. Then the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats where hoofbeats shouldn't be. You freeze. The cattle feel it too. Ears twitching, muscles coiled, and then like thunder cracking through your ribs, the herd explodes, dust flies, horns clash, ground shakes. It's a stampede. And this is the real danger of the cowboy life. Not duels, not outlaws, not saloon brawls, but 2,000 pounds of panicked beef running at full speed, and you caught somewhere in the middle. Hollywood makes stampedes look exciting. Horses leap over cliffs. Cowboys shout dramatically into the wind. Sometimes there's slow motion, a musical swell, a miraculous save. But here, it's chaos. You don't shout. You scream. You don't ride into the herd with cinematic bravado. You ride alongside it, trying to turn the leaders before they drag the rest off a cliff or into a canyon. If you fall, you die. If your horse slips, you die. If your rope gets tangled around your wrist, you really die. You yank Twitchy's reins and aim for the left flank. His ears flatten. He's terrified. So are you. But neither of you has a choice. The herd isn't going to stop unless someone makes it stop. The worst part? No one knows exactly why they started running. Maybe a rattlesnake hissed. Maybe thunder rolled in the distance. Maybe someone dropped a pan. Historians still argue whether cattle stampede more from sound or vibration. Either way, once it starts, it's like trying to stop a river with your bare hands. You've been through 3 stampedes before. One where a rider lost his arm. One where 30 head vanished into a ravine. And one where you swore you saw a cow climb a small tree. You're still not sure how she did it. And here's the kicker. You don't get extra pay for stopping a stampede. No medal, no applause. Just the bitter taste of adrenaline and a bruised hip you won't admit to until the swelling forces your pants to rip. Let's say you're lucky this time. You and the others manage to angle the leaders into a wide loop. You ride hard, flanking them, yelling, waving your hat. Eventually, the panic slows. The pounding grows less rhythmic. One by one, the cattle stop. Dust settles like snow on your shoulders. Silence. You pull up, gasping, your throat raw. Twitchy is soaked in sweat, his eyes wild, and you realize your boot is full of blood. From where? Who knows? That's tomorrow's problem. Now comes the counting. You ride the perimeter. Find out who's missing. Any cattle? Riders? You lost 3 steers to a gully. 1 cowhand broke a rib. Cookie lost a pan. Again. But no one died. You call that a win. Hollywood rarely shows these moments after. The broken fence posts, the bent stirrups, the quiet swearing as you check every steer for injury. It's not glamorous. It's exhausting. But it's the job. Now let's pivot. Because while stampedes are flashy, there are other dangers cowboys faced every day. Most of them far less exciting and far more likely to kill you slowly. First up, weather. You're not riding through endless sunbeams. The West throws tantrums like a toddler with a stick of dynamite. Blistering heat by day. Freezing cold by night. Thunderstorms that roll in faster than you can unsaddle. Hail that dents your hat. Flash floods that wipe out the lowland crossings. You've had your boots filled with water and then frozen solid by morning. You've seen lightning strike a mesquite tree 30 feet from your tent and set the entire camp firewood pile ablaze. And then there's disease. You get a cut, nothing serious, until it swells, turns purple, and suddenly you're down with fever. No antibiotics, no antiseptic. Maybe a little whiskey, maybe some chewed tobacco slapped on the wound if someone remembers an old folk cure. If it works, great. If not, you hope you're not near any rivers, because the only way out is on a floating pine box. You remember a cowhand who got bit by a tick and went blind in one eye, another who caught a fever and forgot his own name for 3 days. You once had a tooth go bad and had to knock it out with the butt of your revolver. Twitchy never looked at you the same again. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cowboys believed if you tied a piece of copper wire around your wrist, it would prevent infection. Others carried garlic in their pockets. Elijah swears by chewing willow bark. You'd try it, but it tastes like tree and sadness. You're also vulnerable to wildlife, not just rattlesnakes and coyotes, but bulls, stallions, badgers, swarms of bees, and once a highly aggressive squirrel that caused 3 injuries and 1 very awkward campfire story. Even your own gear can betray you. Saddles crack, reins snap, guns misfire, ropes catch your wrist and yank you off a moving horse. Once, a cowhand got dragged half a mile before someone noticed. He lived, but now everyone calls him Rug Burn. And then there's violence. Not the cinematic kind with 6 shooters at high noon, but the quiet, dangerous tension between men who haven't slept, are out of chewing tobacco, and think you're riding too close to their flank. Fist fights happened. Knives came out. Someone once pulled a pistol because his beans were stolen. Trail bosses had to be part counselor, part warden. A bad crew could tear itself apart before the herd made it to market. You once broke up a fight over a missing hat. Turned out a cow had eaten it. The cowboy never forgave the cow or you for laughing. Hollywood wants the cowboy to be a hero dodging bullets and bar fights. But out here, danger is quieter, more patient. It waits in the dirty water, in the horned shadow behind a steer, in the way your boot slips on a wet log. You saddle up again. You check the herd. You whistle low, and Twitchy moves forward, tired but obedient. You ride into the night with a bruise on your hip, dirt in your mouth, and the knowledge that you'll do it all again tomorrow. Because out here, you don't outrun danger. You learn to ride beside it. The fire crackles softly tonight, low and steady, like it knows everyone's too tired for anything more dramatic. You lean back against your saddle, boots kicked out toward the heat, hat tipped low enough to shade your eyes, but not so low you can't keep an eye on the horizon. Somewhere in the darkness, Elijah hums that same old tune again, half lullaby, half funeral march. Isaiah pokes the coals with a stick and mutters a joke under his breath. No one laughs, but not because it wasn't funny, just because you've all been laughing the same laugh for weeks now. You exhale, and somewhere you wonder, when does this end? Because that's another lie the movies tell you, that the cowboy life is all freedom, no ties, no rules, just you, the horse, and the horizon. But here's the truth. The cowboy wasn't free. He was stuck. You didn't get rich. You didn't own land. Most of you didn't even own a decent pair of boots. You worked long days for little pay, slept on the ground, ate from tins, and risked your life for someone else's profit. And the worst part, you weren't building toward anything. Hollywood loves a clean arc. A cowboy who starts as a loner, finds purpose, falls in love, wins a showdown, rides off into the sunset with a moral victory and a new life. But you ride in circles. The trail ends. You collect your pay, if the boss is honest. Then you drift. Maybe pick up another job. Maybe drink too much. Maybe find a bunkhouse where you're welcome. Maybe not. No home, no savings, no retirement. Just worn hands, busted gear, and a story no one wants to hear. You're not the hero. You're not the villain. You're the background character, the guy driving the herd while someone else becomes a legend. And still, you ride. Because what else is there? Historians still debate whether cowboys chose this life for freedom or fell into it out of desperation. Probably both. A lot of ex-soldiers, former slaves, immigrants, and runaways found their way to the saddle. The open range didn't ask for a resume. It asked if you could ride, rope, and stay quiet when needed. There's a quiet dignity in that, but also a sadness. You think about the towns you pass through, always the same. A main street with a saloon, maybe a blacksmith, a general store. Sometimes a sheriff, sometimes not. You get a night or two of hot food, maybe a bath if you're flush with coin, maybe a bed if the boarding house isn't full. Then back to the trail. In the movies, cowboys are loners by choice. Strong, silent types who don't need anyone. But in reality, loneliness was a slow poison. You'd talk to your horse, to yourself, to the sky, just to hear your own voice. You'd miss people you barely liked just because they filled the silence. You'd sit around the fire and pretend the same joke was funny just to feel human. And sometimes, when the ride was long and the silence too deep, you'd sing. Quiet, half-forgotten songs your mother taught you, or ones you heard back in town. Maybe the others joined in. Maybe they didn't. You once met a cowboy who carved the same woman's name into every tree he passed. No one knew if she was real. But that tree trail stretched 60 miles. Either he loved her, or he just needed to believe someone was waiting. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cowboys carried tiny pocket mirrors, not for vanity, but to remember what they looked like. Months without seeing your own face does something strange to the mind. You stop feeling real. You become just another shape in the dust. And still, you had to maintain a kind of cowboy pride. Your clothes weren't flashy, but they mattered. A good hat meant status. A quality pair of boots meant you were doing okay. A clean shirt on payday might catch a glance in the saloon. You didn't want to be invisible. You just wanted to feel like you belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere changed every 2 weeks. The idea of settling down, that was a dream most gave up. Ranch work was seasonal. Trails had off months. A bad winter or a dry summer could wipe out your employer, and with him, your paycheck. You might fall in love once or twice, maybe leave letters you never sent, maybe return to the same town hoping she hadn't moved on. But most of the time, she had, or married someone with land, or just got tired of waiting for a man who always promised next spring. And what about family? Most cowboys were young, teens, early 20s. A few older hands who'd never quit, never settled, never found a better way to live. You might write to your folks once in a while, or not at all. If you disappeared, no one would know for weeks, maybe months, maybe never. They say the West was lawless, but really it was just forgetful. It forgot people fast. A man could vanish, and the land wouldn't blink. The next drive would come, the next herd, the next name around the fire. You think of that as you stare into the coals. You think about how the movies never show the mornings when you wake up with dirt in your teeth and no idea what day it is. How they skip the endless miles of nothing, where your only company is a creaky saddle and a sunburned neck. You think about all the cowboys who rode this same trail year after year until their legs gave out or their luck did. And you wonder, will anyone remember you? Will your name get carved into a story? Or will you just become part of the dust? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the point isn't being remembered, it's riding while you can. So you stretch your sore legs, sip burnt coffee, and smile as Isaiah tells that one story again. The one about the one-eyed steer and the terrified banker. And you laugh. Because sometimes a good laugh by the fire is all the immortality you need. The sun rises like it always does, too early and too bright. You blink against it, pull your hat low, and stretch joints that groan like wagon wheels. Twitchy whinnies softly, annoyed at being awake again, and frankly, you feel the same. Today, though, the trail takes a different turn. Because for the first time in weeks, you spot the outlines of a town in the distance. Low buildings, wooden fences, a water tower, maybe a church steeple poking above the rooftops. You know what that means. It's payday. And with it comes the myth of the cowboy saloon. In movies, cowboys stroll through swinging doors with confidence and cool. One boot over the other, one eyebrow cocked, cards on the table, whiskey in hand, piano playing ragtime in the corner, barmaids in ruffles and lace pouring drinks with a wink, and sure, some of that's true. But not all of it, because stepping into a real frontier saloon, that's a whole different experience. First, the smell hits you. Not whiskey or perfume, sweat, smoke, stale beer, and desperation. The floors are sticky, the tables uneven. There's a card game in the corner, but the players haven't blinked in an hour. One guy's got a knife tucked in his boot. Another's asleep on his feet. A third is whispering to a jug, like it's going to talk back. You step up to the bar, order a drink. It's called whiskey, but you're not sure it came from anything resembling a distillery. more like turpentine mixed with bad decisions. You sip, your throat protests. You sip again anyway. Drinks were cheap, and for a cowboy who just got paid $30, $40 for a month of grueling labor, the saloon was a place to forget, not just to relax, but to vanish for a while. Most of your wages would disappear in a day or two. A few drinks, a few rounds of poker, maybe some food, maybe a bath, if the town had one. Maybe the company of someone willing to pretend they liked you for the price of a silver dollar. Historians still argue whether cowboys wasted their money or simply lived fast, because they didn't expect to live long. Either way, the saloon was where that speed happened. No quiet goodbyes, no reflective toasts, just loud, smoky, chaotic distraction. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cowboys kept their wages sewn into their clothes to avoid blowing it all in one night. Others handed their pay to the bartender and asked him to ration it back in coins, 10 cents at a time. Of course, once the fifth drink hit, that plan usually fell apart. And it wasn't all cards and whiskey. Some saloons doubled as dance halls, brothels, general stores, or even makeshift churches during the week. You could buy a drink, hear a sermon, and get your boots mended, all under one roof. Multitasking frontier style. And what about the bar fights? Oh, they happened, but not every night, and not in slow motion. Usually fast, ugly, and over in seconds. A punch, a shove, a broken bottle. Maybe a pistol drawn, maybe not. Someone got tossed through a door once, but he mostly tripped on a spittoon and took the door with him. Most cowboys weren't itching for a fight. You were tired. You were sore. You didn't want to throw punches. You wanted a seat, a drink, and a warm room. Violence was a risk, not a ritual. The barkeep knew this. He kept a club under the counter just in case. His eyes missed nothing. You respected him, or feared him, or both. And speaking of respect, saloon etiquette mattered. Don't touch another man's hat. Don't cut into a card game unless invited. Don't flirt with someone's company unless you really want to get punched. Don't boast about your guns unless you're ready to prove it. And if someone challenges you to a duel over a spilled drink, you say, sorry, buy them another, and change tables. Dueling? Rare. Despite what movies show, most cowboys avoided showdowns. Gunfights were unpredictable, messy, and often fatal for the wrong person, sometimes the bystanders. Besides, bullets were expensive, and doctors even more so. Most disputes were settled with words, threats, or a fist to the jaw. And if it escalated, well, there was always the jail or the undertaker. You remember one night when a tall stranger in a red shirt offered to arm wrestle anyone for $1. 3 men took him up on it. He won all 3. Then he bought a round for everyone, tipped his hat, and left without a word. No one ever learned his name. You think about him sometimes, like a passing storm made of muscle and mystery. Another night, Cookie got so drunk he challenged a piano to a duel for spying on him. He lost. The piano remained smug. You didn't go to the saloon to become someone else. You went to remember who you were before the dust, the saddle sores, the endless hours of mooing and silence. You could sing, dance, gamble, tell tall tales, be ridiculous, be young, be yourself, just for an hour or two. Maybe that's why you forgive the movies a little, because even if they dress it up too fancy, they're chasing something real, a glimpse of that liminal space between wilderness and civilization. the place where boots meet floorboards, dust meets lantern light, and rough men find a corner to exhale. Then, just like that, you're back on the trail. You've spent your pay, your hat smells like smoke, your wallet's lighter, your heart maybe is heavier, but your boots are oiled, your coat's patched, and you've got a new story or two to tell. And somehow, that's enough. You mount Twitchy, tip your hat to the morning, and ride out as the town fades behind you. Another saloon in the rear view of memory. Another fire waiting ahead. And one day, maybe someone will write about you. Not the way you really were, maybe, but the way you felt for those fleeting nights of laughter and light. The landscape flattens again, stretching into that familiar expanse of sagebrush, sand, and sky. No fences now, no water towers or hitching posts. Just you, Twitchy, the herd, and the wind whispering secrets you'll never quite understand. As the hooves beat out their rhythm, slow and steady, your thoughts start to wander, not to the past or the next meal, but to something stranger, quieter, harder to name. Because there's one thing the movies almost never talk about: cowboys and silence. Not the dramatic kind, not the storm before the shootout kind, the real silence, the kind that wraps around you for hours, for days, like a heavy wool blanket, the kind that doesn't ask questions, it just waits. No music, no engines, no phone ringing, no clatter of cities or hum of civilization. Just the creak of saddle leather, the distant low of cattle, and the wind brushing across the land like a giant, slow broom. Hollywood tends to fill every space with sound, dialogue, orchestras, background chatter. But out here, you learn that silence is its own kind of sound. And sometimes it's the loudest thing on the trail. You'll ride for hours with nothing but your thoughts. At first, they're noisy. Chores, aches, what you'd give for a bath and a fresh biscuit. But eventually, those thoughts fall away, and something else rises in their place. A kind of deep noticing, the way the light falls through the dust, the exact shade of purple on the horizon, the twitch of a steer's ear that tells you rain is coming. You begin to hear things you didn't before, your own breathing, the bones in your spine shifting, a hawk screaming somewhere overhead. Some cowboys feared this silence. They'd hum or talk just to break it. Others came to crave it like a cure. A few went too deep and never quite made it back. You once rode 6 hours without saying a word, not because you had to, but because it felt sacred. Like to speak would shatter something fragile and ancient. Isaiah rode beside you the whole time, quiet as prayer. Neither of you ever mentioned it after. You didn't need to. Historians still argue whether cowboys were spiritual or just stoic. But one thing is certain: the trail invited reflection. You'd remember people you hadn't thought about in years. You'd rerun old mistakes like campfire stories in your mind. You'd plan futures that probably wouldn't happen. You'd talk to ghosts. Sometimes the silence would break in strange ways. You'd laugh, loud and sudden, at a joke that popped into your head with no warning. Or you'd sing, not for anyone else, just to feel the vibration in your chest. You once told a whole story to a patch of cactus just because it looked like it was listening. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cowboys swore the desert whispered at night. Not ghosts or spirits, just the wind bouncing in odd ways. You heard it once, like murmurs moving between the rocks. Elijah said it was just air pressure. Mateo said it was the voice of the earth. You still don't know who was right. The thing is, silence wasn't just part of the job. It was the job. It was in the waiting, the watching, the endless miles between anything happening at all. You'd learn to read tiny signs, a bent blade of grass, a fresh hoof print, a bird flying in the wrong direction. Those details became your language. You didn't talk about them. You just saw them, knew them. It made you slow down, made you notice, made you part of something older and larger than yourself. You weren't a cowboy riding through the landscape. You were the landscape moving. But the silence wasn't always gentle. Sometimes it was loud with fear. When a steer went missing, when storm clouds gathered in the east, when someone didn't return after going to check the fence line, that kind of silence pressed in on you, made your heart beat louder than it should, the quiet after a gunshot, the stillness when a man falls and doesn't get back up, the hush of the campfire when no one wants to say the obvious. Those silences hurt. Hollywood loves to end scenes with gunfire or declarations. Out here, most endings come in silence. A nod, a look, a single breath. Then you move on. You remember the time Elijah buried his dog. Didn't say a word, just dug the hole, wrapped the body in his coat, and stood there, staring at the ground. No speech, no song, just a long silence that said everything. You stood beside him, said nothing too, because sometimes words aren't big enough. But silence is. There's another kind of silence too, the kind that comes from knowing your place. You're not important out here, not really. You could be replaced tomorrow, and the trail would go on. The herd doesn't care who rides beside it. The sun will rise whether or not you get up. The wind will still blow if you don't. That sounds grim, but it isn't. It's freeing. You're not the cowboy. You're a cowboy, and that's enough. You learn humility. You stop chasing glory. You just do the work, ride the miles, tie your rope, tend the herd, keep the fire alive. And in those small, silent actions, you find meaning. That's what the movies miss most. The quiet meaning, the quiet courage. Not the shootouts and standoffs, but the man who keeps going day after day with no applause, no audience, just the sound of hooves and his own breath in the wind. You ride now, the only sound, the jingle of your tack, the shuffle of hooves, the soft wheeze of Twitchy's breath. No one says anything. No one needs to. The silence wraps around you again, not empty, but full. You smile and ride on, the cattle ball low as you ease them down a shallow slope, hoof by hoof, into a narrow valley of waist-high grass and golden dust. The air here smells different, less dry, more alive. A creek somewhere nearby trickles in a lazy rhythm, and you think, maybe we're getting close, and you are. Not just to the end of the trail, but to one of the biggest myths the West ever told. That the cowboy was always a white, rugged, American-born man, usually named something like Buck, or Tex, or Clay. You glance to your left. Mateo rides there, his voice humming softly in Spanish. On your right, Isaiah adjusts his hat. He's been out here longer than you, twice as skilled with a rope. Ahead, a Comanche guide moves like wind through the brush, barely disturbing a twig. This is what the West really looked like. It was never just one kind of cowboy. Hollywood didn't show you that. It painted the Old West in shades of dust and denim and left out the full spectrum. But you live it every day, and the truth rides beside you. By some estimates, a quarter of working cowboys in the late 1800s were black. Some were formerly enslaved, some were born free. Many were veterans of the Civil War. They were horse breakers, wranglers, cooks, trail bosses. They had names, stories, skills, but Hollywood rewrote them as background characters or erased them entirely. Isaiah, for example, is the best roper you've ever met. He taught you how to throw a loop in the wind. He once caught a calf mid-run while holding his coffee cup in the other hand. He never brags, but you know he could outride half the men in any film. He's also the first to call you out when you do something stupid, which, let's be honest, is often. And Mateo? He grew up in Sonora, crossed the border for work at 17. He sings songs older than this country, with lyrics that tell stories of horses and heartbreak and saints watching from the hills. He can track a missing steer across dry rock and knows how to fix a saddle with twine and patience. But on screen, his story would get boiled down to a sidekick role, maybe a comic relief moment, maybe a single line in a dusty tavern, never the lead. Historians still argue how much of the American cowboy tradition was borrowed or stolen from Mexican vaquero culture. But if you ride with Mateo for a day, you stop arguing. The lasso, vaquero invention, the style of saddle, spurs, chaps, cattle herding techniques, also vaquero. Even the very word buckaroo is a misheard version of vaquero. And native cowboys, they're out here too. Some work as guides, some herd, some ride with quiet intensity, hands steady, eyes scanning the land like it's a language you've never quite learned to read. You've met Lakota, Comanche, Apache riders, men with family histories longer than the trails you ride. Some work for ranches. Others ride because it's the only way they know how to stay close to the land. Sometimes they're welcomed, sometimes barely tolerated, but always essential. You once rode for 2 days with a Comanche cowboy named Toba. He said 5 words the entire trip, but he found every lost steer and led you around a canyon that would have swallowed the whole herd. He vanished before sunrise the next day, leaving only a feather tied to the fence. You still carry that feather. And what about women? They're not just waiting in homesteads, fluttering fans on porches. Some are in the saddle, too. You've seen them, heard the stories. A few ride openly. A few pass as men. A few run their own ranches with hands tougher than any cowpoke you met. There's a woman named Rose who runs cattle up near Montana, drinks a coffee black, carries a pistol named Abigail, once drove a herd across 50 miles of storm and snow without losing a single steer. You wouldn't cross her even if you were riding a war elephant. Of course, the trail wasn't equal. That's the hard truth. Black cowboys often got paid less, faced violence in towns, were barred from saloons or gambling halls. Latino riders were sometimes hired for their skill, then dismissed when the herd reached market. Native riders were blamed for things they didn't do. And women? They had to fight twice as hard for half the respect. You've seen Isaiah talk his way out of trouble a dozen times, and you've seen him walk into a store and be followed like he's already stolen something. You've seen Mateo ignored while giving orders. You've seen men look at a woman in trousers and pretend she's invisible. Still, the work has a way of leveling things, at least on the trail. Out here, it doesn't matter what color your skin is or where you were born. If you can ride, rope, work, and watch someone's back in the middle of a stampede, you're family. The land doesn't care who you are. It only asks one question. Can you survive it? And that, maybe, is the quiet promise of cowboy life that never made it into the scripts. The way the trail erases pretense. The way it strips you down to your usefulness, your grit, your humor, your honesty. You don't have time for lies or flattery or politics when there's a sick steer and a lightning storm on the horizon. So, you ride, and you learn from each other. Isaiah teaches you how to mend a boot sole with wire and tar. Mateo teaches you which plants make good tea and which ones will make you see dancing goats. Rose teaches you that stubbornness is a weapon, and that love, real love, might look more like shared silence than poetry. You realize the West was always a quilt, not a clean sheet, sewn from dozens of cultures, histories, and borrowed tricks. And cowboys? They were patchwork people, made from scraps, pride, survival, and the stubborn refusal to be anything other than free. Not free in the political sense, not free in the Hollywood sense, but free to live in a moment without apology. You guide the herd into the shallow creek. The cattle drink, snort, wade knee-deep. Twitchy nibbles the grass. Elijah cracks a joke that makes even Isaiah laugh. You sit in the shade of a cottonwood tree and listen to the quiet chatter of riders who weren't supposed to exist in the version of the West you were taught, but they're here, and they always were. The creek vanishes behind you, the grass grows shorter, the dust kicks higher. You shift in the saddle not from discomfort, but from instinct. Something in your bones knows this stretch of land means you're close. Not to the end of the trail, but to the truth that movies never really wanted to talk about. Because if there's one thing Westerns taught the world, it's that the cowboy was the last wild thing, the ultimate rebel, the lone wolf, the man who never looked back. But that's not what you've seen. The cowboy doesn't live wild. He lives within boundaries, constantly, exhaustingly, and most of them invented. First, there's the land itself. You've heard the word frontier tossed around like it was up for grabs. But what they don't say is this land already had people, cultures, languages, systems of respect and ownership that didn't need fences to be real. The cowboy myth says the land was tamed. But when you look at it now, open, wind-swept, unconquered, you realize the land never needed taming. People just needed to justify claiming it. You've crossed rivers that were once sacred, camped on sites where battles were fought before anyone in your crew was born. You've ridden past ruined pueblos, ghost towns, and graves with no names. And still, somehow, movies made it all feel like blank canvas. There's no blank canvas out here. There's just paint someone scraped off so they could start again. And then there's the code. Hollywood loves the cowboy code. Honor, justice, protect the weak, speak plain, die brave. Sounds nice. But out here, you've seen the real code. Work hard, keep your word, share your food, don't complain too much, don't touch another man's horse, don't snore louder than the coyotes, and when someone's hurt, help them, even if you don't like them. That's it. No speeches, no oaths, just habits, baked by sun and dust and time. You've also learned the rules are different depending on who you are. Isaiah has to be twice as careful in town. Mateo's always the one asked to show his hands when a deputy gets nervous. Rose can outshoot anyone, but the second she walks into a general store, someone assumes she's just lost. So the cowboy code, Turns out it only works when everyone agrees to pretend it's fair. Historians still argue whether that code was ever real, or just a fiction made by dime novelists trying to sell stories to kids who'd never smelled a latrine pit. You figure it doesn't matter. What matters is what you've seen. Quiet loyalty, hard-earned respect, and a kind of reluctant kindness that only comes from shared misery. There's also a rule about truth, not the truth you read in books, the kind you learn from experience. Like the truth that cows are dumber than bricks but faster than your horse when they're scared, or that a cowboy breakfast means beans again, always beans, or that loneliness will sneak up on you faster than a snake in tall grass. You've told lies on the trail, everyone has. Big fish stories, boasts about old rodeos, tales about women who probably didn't exist. But when it really mattered, you told the truth, because out here a lie can kill you. If you say the herd's safe and it's not, someone could get trampled. If you say the river's crossable and it isn't, you could lose 3 men and 100 head. If you say you're fine and you're not, you might die quietly before morning. So the truth becomes a kind of currency, not fancy, just reliable. You once heard Isaiah say, "Out here, you either lie big or not at all." You think he's right. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cowboys carried tiny notebooks where they wrote down every mile, every steer count, every injury. Not for pay, not for history, just to feel like someone was keeping score. You found one once, long after the hand who wrote it had moved on. The last line just said, "Herd crossed the river, sun hot, missed breakfast." That's the kind of poetry cowboys leave behind. And what about justice? Hollywood loves the sheriff with a star, the outlaw with a moral code, the dramatic trial in a dusty courtroom. But out here, justice is messy, fast, and mostly improvised. If someone steals from you, you handle it. If a man goes violent, the crew stops him, sometimes with fists, sometimes worse. Towns had lawmen, but they were often underpaid, outgunned, and answering to whoever held the biggest cattle contract. You once saw a ranch hand get caught cheating at cards. The other stripped him of his boots and made him walk 20 miles to the nearest town barefoot. Was it justice? Depends who you ask. The point is, cowboys weren't noble heroes. They were survivors. They made mistakes. They drank too much. They held grudges. They let things go too long. They hurt people, and they helped them. They were human, just like you. But movies didn't have time for that. They needed tidy endings. Good guys in white hats, bad guys in black. Justice served. Horse rides off into the horizon. Out here, justice is more complicated. Sometimes the guy in the white hat was just cleaner. Sometimes the bad guy had a point. Sometimes the horse didn't make it. You've buried horses. You've forgiven people who didn't deserve it. You've been forgiven when you didn't deserve it. And you've learned, slowly, that being a cowboy isn't about being a hero. It's about showing up. Showing up when it's cold, when it's unfair, when the herd is cranky and your back is worse and the cook burned the biscuits again. It's not about standing tall in front of a crowd. It's about standing up when no one else will. Because the work has to get done. The sun dips lower now. You can feel the weight of the day softening. The cattle stretch out in an even line. Twitchy snorts gently and flicks his tail. Up ahead, you see the dust cloud of the herd's lead starting to settle. There's a town not far now. You think about how, when people say cowboy, they still picture the Hollywood version. But if they rode a mile in your boots, they'd know better. They'd know the cowboy isn't an icon. He's a worker, not a myth. A man with cracked hands and muddy boots and more silence than words. And that's enough. The town appears at last not like a painting or a promise, but like what it really is, a scattering of wooden buildings, smoke curling from chimneys, a water trough tipped sideways, and someone yelling at a mule. The illusion's gone. No golden glow, no swelling music, just real people, real work, real dust. You ride in slow, not because you're being dramatic, but because Twitchy's tired, and so are you. Your legs ache, your mouth tastes like campfire beans, your back might be permanently bent. And as the town draws near, you feel something strange. You don't want it to end. The herd's delivered, the job's done, and that should feel good, victory, right? But instead, it just feels hollow, because no one talks about what happens after the cowboy rides into town. In the movies, he gets the girl, gets revenge, or gets redemption. Then it cuts to the sunset, and we all go home happy. But here you are, standing in a real town, watching that final scene play out without the music, without the audience, without the closure. And you realize the cowboy doesn't get closure. He gets dust. You lead Twitchy toward the livery, hand off the reins, pat his neck, whisper a thank you like it matters. Then you start walking. The main street is all noise and motion. Kids dart between wagons. A woman hangs laundry on a crooked line. A blacksmith wipes his brow. The saloon is already swinging open and shut, open and shut. You find the bunkhouse first, a stiff cot, a half-clean blanket. You lie down, close your eyes, and dream of horses. Because here's the truth, you're never really off the trail, not in your head, not in your hands. The rhythm of the ride stays with you. The lowing of cattle echoes in your sleep. The dust has worked so far into your skin, you're not sure it'll ever come out. And tomorrow, you'll go out again. Different herd, different boss, same boots. Historians still argue whether cowboy life was noble or tragic. But they're missing the point. It wasn't either. It just was. You once asked Isaiah if he ever thought of quitting. He said, "Only every day." Then I remember I hate standing still more than I hate riding. That about sums it up. You don't ride because it's glorious. You ride because it's motion. Because out there, at least you know what the rules are. You know what matters. Rope the steer. Keep your word. Watch the sky. Fix what breaks. Help when it hurts. Share what you've got. Sleep light. Ride straight. Back in town, it gets messy. Too many expectations. Too many eyes. People start asking you what comes next. You don't have an answer. You weren't raised for futures. You were trained for trails. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cowboys, once they got too old to ride, stayed on at ranches as fence menders or storytellers. Others vanished completely, headed to the mountains, the desert, Canada. Some became town drunks. A few became lawmen. One became a piano tuner. No one ever really retires from cowboying. You just change your shape. You think of Mateo, gone quiet these last few weeks. Said he might head back to Sonora. Said there was a girl, maybe, or just a mountain he missed. You didn't ask which. It doesn't matter. He'll ride, and that's enough. You think of Rose, who hasn't written. Not that you expected her to. She never promised anything. but you keep hoping a letter will appear with your name in bold on the envelope, smelling like saddle leather and pine. You think of the cow you named after your uncle, the one who kept running into trees, and you smile, because this is it, the real end. Not a gunfight, not a kiss, just a quiet moment in a quiet room after a long, loud trail. You take off your boots, drop your hat, stretch out your spine until it pops like a campfire twig, and you think, maybe tomorrow, maybe you'll stay a day or two, maybe head to the saloon, maybe find someone to dance with or just play a hand of cards, maybe not. But eventually, you'll ride out again, because the truth is, there's no after in the cowboy story. There's just the next trail, and the one after that, and the one after that, and maybe that's enough. Because when all the myths fall away, when the dust settles and the music stops, you're not a hero or a villain or a symbol. You're a cowboy, and you're still riding. Now, your saddle's off, your boots are by the bed, and the last glow of the trail is fading from your mind like stars before morning. The herd's delivered, the fire's out, the bunk is warm enough, and the night hums steady outside your window. You don't have to ride anywhere right now, not for a few hours at least. Let your body soften into the mattress, bones sinking deeper than dust ever did. Let the echo of hooves and wind drift away, quieter now, like a song ending just past your hearing. The west will keep turning without you. The wind will still blow across the plains. Someone else will saddle up. Someone else will squint at the sun and taste grit in their teeth. But for now, you rest, and maybe, in some small corner of your sleep, you'll find the trail again. Not the hard one, not the one that scraped your skin and broke your boots, but the gentle one, the trail that winds through warm hills and soft grass, where the horses are calm, the fire never smokes, and every ride ends with someone glad to see you. That's the cowboy dream, isn't it? Not fame, not fortune, just enough peace to sleep with both eyes closed. So take a deep breath now. Let it out slow. The dust can wait. The morning will come, and so will the trail. But for tonight, you're home. You're safe. You're done. Good night, cowboy.